Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by my friends at the McPherson Tax Defense Group, 1-800-BEAT-IRS, beatirs.com. That's BEAT-IRS, serving all your tax needs since 1978. We have with us Dr. Jay Richards. He is the executive director of The Stream. The Stream, by the way, is celebrating its one-year anniversary. We'll talk more about that in the second segment. He is the assistant research professor in the School of Business and Economics at the Catholic University of America. He's a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute, prolific writer, including a New York Times bestseller, Infiltrated and Indivisible. And he's also the author of Money, Greed, and God. We're going to talk a little bit about the kind of split, if you will, amongst evangelicals, Catholics. Actually, not really the split. It's just a mess out there. Dr. Richards, is that an appropriate description of the lay of the land right now, as far as
tightest description that we can come up with? Is that it's just a complete mess and defies any kind of rational analysis.
Well, especially, so now we've got the Palin endorsement of Trump.
Yeah.
I look at the field. I've not made any endorsements, but there's a lot of confusion. And we were talking during the break about how, everybody has their negatives. I think that this is my take on it, and I'll let you respond and tell me what you see going on,
Sure.
and then kind of what the underlying motivations are. But I think that there's such disgust in the body politic with the direction of this country. And a lot of evangelicals, Christians, Catholics, they look at this thing and they say, okay, we have supported these strong people of faith for office before, and they go, entirely a different direction than what they say they're going during election season. So now what we have to do is just wash our hands of all of it and vote for the most anti-establishment guy out there. At least that's part of the Trump split, for sure.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
I do. I think that's essentially what's going on. That's what's scrambling this election cycle, is that people, both on the left and the right, have a disgust with at least what they think of as the establishment. They have this kind of idealized picture in their heads of what the establishment is. And a significant chunk of the electorate is basically going for the candidate that they think is the most anti-establishment, even if the person doesn't actually hold any of the kind of ideological positions that the people would actually like. So you get Sarah Palin's a perfect example. She's been consistently pro-life. She's consistent on marriage. She's been a social conservative. Donald Trump has absolutely no record on that. In fact, any record he actually has is entirely on the wrong side. He's talking differently now, but there's no evidence to sort of get, that we could point to say, okay, yeah, he's changed his mind on marriage, he's changed his mind on abortion. And yet we have this endorsement, and I do think it has to do with this sort of outsider status. They both have had reality TV shows that were popular. I don't know if that's relevant or not, but it's just a very, very strange thing. And now, on the other side, we've got in New Hampshire, it looks like today, CNN poll was just announced that it's like 2-1 Bernie Sanders against over Hillary Clinton. And so I think the same thing is happening over on the left. Bernie Sanders, even though he's been in the Senate, I don't know how long, for decades, I believe, he's considered the anti-establishment character because of his rhetoric and because he's far left. And so he's getting a second look because of that.
Well, and I think, part of this, too, you look at the polling data that's out there. One of the most recent, I think, scary polls is that 75%, and I'm not sure which outfit actually did this, but you've probably heard this poll. 75% of Americans don't believe they really live in a representative democracy anymore, that their vote doesn't count, that, you elect somebody to office, they're going to go off and do whatever, as you put it, the kind of the amorphous establishment or ruling class wants them to do. And I think that, part of the motivation for folk like Sarah Palin is that, look, we stood behind the conservatives like George Bush, for example, and others that have talked the strong pro-life, pro-family voice, and look at where we're at today. Abortion is still legal, homosexual marriage now legal, and this is largely a consequence, for example, of Supreme Court justices that are appointed by Republican presidents, the majority at least. And so folks think, what else can we do but elect somebody that's going to shake this up and go the direction that the people want? I think you're right about Trump. You've got these really troubling recent comments, like the one he made several months ago, that he thinks his sister, who's a federal judge and a radical pro-abort, supported partial birth abortion, would make a good Supreme Court justice. That is just downright frightening.
It is, and I think what's going on with Trump, if you look at his political donations, it's mostly not just to Democrats, but to religious or liberal Democrats. Now, I do think, in fact, that's not because he's a deeply committed liberal liberal Democrat in his political philosophy. I think he's a crony, and he's giving donations to the politicians that are in power. If you live in New York City, it's almost all liberal Democrats. So I wouldn't say that sort of proves his ideology. I do think it shows us, though, that he's not deeply committed to any of these things. And the reality is, if a person's not deeply committed, say, to the sanctity of life, you get to Washington, D.C., that's a very costly position to have to hold. That's why, for instance, even good pro-life Republicans sometimes go wrong in their appointments. They have good appointments, and they're more likely to have good appointments than a liberal Democrat, but even they sometimes go wrong because the drift is all toward the left. And now you get someone like Donald Trump, for whom issues like marriage and abortion, I don't even think they're really even going concerns for him. And so, if anything, I think it's to be vastly less likely that he would make good appointments. It doesn't mean that the conservative Republican is always going to do the right thing or be able to do the right thing, but it's certainly more likely, I would think, that candidate's going to be able to do the right thing than the one that doesn't actually even care about the issue.
Well, we just don't know. I mean, that's what it really boils down to. We don't know what he's going to do. There is one consistency in his rhetoric. You know, you look at, for example, the interviews he did. I saw one 20-plus years ago with Oprah Winfrey. And his call to make America great again in that interview is almost identical to what you hear today. I mean, he does seem to be an America first type individual. But on these other most important social issues, we just don't know. That's frightening. I mean, is he going to appoint somebody to the Supreme Court that, supports radical positions on abortion? And, of course, part of the argument that a lot of people make with respect to Trump is they grant you all this. They say, yeah, it is unknown. But we know where the establishment, as they put it, is going to go. We're going to have a continuation of the status quo on abortion, a continuation of the status quo on all of these issues that we've lost the battles on. And so what can we harm ourselves by putting somebody like that forward? Now, Wayne Grudem came out, and I want to talk about this because you put up a brief article about this several days ago, right, and endorsed Marco Rubio. And I have a great deal of respect for Wayne Grudem, evangelical theologian. Yeah. Wrote a book on Christianity and politics. I've got that book. Shocked at the endorsement. Give us your explanation.
Oh, I'm surprised that you're shocked by an endorsement. I mean, I think that if he had endorsed Ted Cruz, I would have not been shocked by that either. But I do think what's interesting about the endorsement is that, of course, Wayne he's a friend of mine as well. He's a conservative evangelical. Rubio is a Catholic. But what I think is interesting about the endorsement is that he doesn't just say, well, I agree with Marco Rubio on the issues, but also it's important to me that he seems to be a serious person of faith and a Christian, and he mentions that in the statement. I think this is significant. It's the kind of thing you would not have seen 40 or 50 years ago. You would not have seen conservative Catholics and conservative evangelicals sort of working together in that way. If anything, it would have been very much a liability. I mean, if you look at political debates that, let's say the 19 teens, 100 years ago, if a candidate was a Catholic, even if he was a political conservative, that was a liability because the public philosophy of the United States was essentially a kind of public Protestantism. Move it forward a century since then, and a public philosophy, unfortunately, is godlessness. It's mostly secularism, and I think what the result of that is a lot of Orthodox Catholics and Orthodox evangelicals are starting to work together in more constructive ways, certainly than they were in the past. It's unfortunate that it's required a much more hostile culture for that to happen, though.
Well, I mean, there's absolutely no question that there's alignment. I mean, I have much more, I'm an evangelical, but I'm very much more aligned with conservative Catholics than anybody, outside of that fold. So I agree with you. I'm happy about that. Love what the stream is doing. I don't know what the percentage of Catholic writers are at the stream, but I would assume it's a majority based upon the folk I've interviewed with, and they're just exceptional. I rarely disagree with you guys over there. I do want to talk just briefly, though, again, about Wayne Grudem's endorsement. Does he base the statement of faith of Rubio based upon a personal relationship that he has with him? Or, I mean, do they have some sort of history?
They do know each other, and I know that Grudem, though I wouldn't, they're not personal friends, but I do know Wayne Grudem is a part of a religious liberty advisory council that Rubio announced. That was just actually a few weeks ago, and so the public endorsement actually just happened in the last week. I haven't talked to him personally about this. I myself, I don't endorse candidates. I'm going to vote almost certainly for the Republican, but I honestly feel like there's several good folks on the Republican side of things, and I think that's part of the difficulty we're having is that a lot of people's allegiances are sort of divided, and there are different sorts of things. So I've got Catholic friends here in Washington, D.C. that are totally pro-Cruz, and then I've got evangelical friends that are totally pro-Rubio, and so I think that's interesting. But the ones that do that, they're all doing it because in their judgment, they are picking the candidate, it's sort of Buckley's rule, the most conservative electable candidate. In people's judgments on that can obviously differ as to who that is.
Well, Jay Richard, Executive Director of The Stream, we're going to talk more with him about the one-year anniversary of The Stream, what thestream.org is, and also some of the issues relating to the upcoming presidential elections, the primaries. Stay with us, The Joe Miller Show. If you have any thoughts on what we're talking about, area code 907 outside of Anchorage, 569-1080. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We're on the air with Dr. Jay Richards, the executive editor of The Stream. We're talking about the 2016 cycle, Catholics, evangelicals, Christians, their perspectives, conservatives. Talking a little bit off air about Trump and his recent appearance at Liberty University. I found it kind of interesting in the statement that Jerry Falwell Jr. made leading up to Trump's speech. You know, some criticism followed from that. He apparently doesn't know what 2 Corinthians is. He quoted a scripture verse and said 2 Corinthians.
2 Corinthians.
And then somebody mentioned that, hey, the reason why I knew the verse was because it's part of the school logo up on the wall.
That helps. That definitely helps to have it printed on the wall, you know, for sure. But it doesn't give you the pronunciation, unfortunately. And so it was, I mean, in many ways, we've got several candidates. Marco Rubio is one, Ted Cruz, of course, Mike Huckabee, who was a pastor for many years. For Christian theology is a native language. They have sat in churches for years. They're comfortable with it, and they speak it that way. In many ways, when Donald Trump is speaking it, it's like it's his second language. He's trying to adopt it. He's smart, and he'll probably get it. But you get these awkward moments where he said 2 Corinthians in this case at Liberty. When I heard him speak at the Value Voters Summit, he brought his Bible that he'd gotten as a child when he was confirmed. But it was sort of clear when he was holding it that I don't know that he had seen that Bible in about 40 years.
I was wondering if it was still wrapped in plastic.
Yes, exactly. Oh, this has been protected with the cellophane. So it's these kind of awkward moments. It's clear that, you know, he's been told, okay, Christians are concerned about attacks on Christianity. There are attacks on Christmas. So he brought up Christmas again at Liberty yesterday. But I do think Jerry Falwell Jr.'s introduction, it wasn't just gracious, because, of course, Bernie Sanders spoke there, and he's always very gracious in these introductions at Convocation. But it came close to an endorsement. I mean, it really was, I think, in some ways quite extraordinary, especially considering Donald Trump. And I do think, you know, I think the guy has charisma, and people get in the room with him, and I don't know. I think people maybe just get carried away.
Well, and let's make it clear, too. I mean, you don't have to be a Christian to protect Christian rights. I mean,
no, it's exactly, of course not.
And in fact, it does appear that he's very interested in getting America back to its foundation, which, of course, would be in direct alliance with Christians. And nobody's going to judge his faith either. I mean, no. You know, it's clear that he's not immersed in it, and it's clear that he doesn't know a lot about it. You know, when you're asked, when was the last time he asked God for forgiveness, and he can't respond to it.
He can't think that he ever has. To me, that was kind of the most theologically significant thing. But, you know, I looked, and he's self-identified as Presbyterian for years. We have no reason to think he doesn't, you know, if you ask him the Apostles' Creed, that he would believe it. It's just that it isn't down in his bones, or it hasn't been. Maybe this experience will be a positive thing, and we should pray for that. But I do think it's leading to, you know, on the one hand, it's sort of awkward to see this play out. On the other hand, he clearly believes that conservative Christians are a really important constituency that he has to win over. And so, you know, I think the announcement of our death has been, you know, is not nearly as severe as we might have believed. Many Christians, after the losses in 2008, 2012, you know, conservatives and social conservatives were told, you know, our day had passed and we were irrelevant. But, you know, all the Republican candidates are putting on a good show, and at the very least, and I think trying to appeal to conservative Christians.
And you know, you watch Trump too. I mean, he's going to all the places. I mean, getting right in the middle of it. I mean, in fact, he's gone to some charismatic groups where, you know, you got these pictures of people laying hands on him. And right. I mean, and he's not like crawling out of his skin. It's interesting. I mean, he could just be a great actor. I mean, he's in this stuff a lot. But the one thing that I look for in a candidate, I want somebody who's going to do what they say. And we've had plenty of candidates that, you know, claim to be people of faith that have gone ahead and just kind of moved the country on in the same direction it was headed anyway. And so I understand the angst that a lot of voters are feeling, kind of this internal discord that they have, and supporting somebody like Trump, even though he's not, as you put it, doesn't seem to have the faith in his bones, but, they think that he's better than the direction we've been going. Now, hey, I want to leave enough time to talk about the stream.org. Incredible website. We pick up your articles all the time at restoringliberty.com. It now is a year. I guess this is the 1 year anniversary. Tell us a little bit about the website, who kind of started it, the number of writers, what the mission statement is, and how it's grown over the last year.
Yeah, absolutely. It was started by James Robison and me. So James is an evangelical. He's got a daily TV show on Christian TV with his wife, Betty. He was a crusade evangelist with Billy Graham in the 1970s and 1980s. And James and I wrote a book together in 2012 called Indivisible that tries to bring together and make a case for the ordinary person, the case for both political and economic and cultural and social conservatism. So in other words, not just the economic case and not just the social case, but to argue that these parts of the case for conservatism are indivisible, that they go together, and also to try to create a platform where Catholics and evangelicals, serious ones, serious Orthodox Catholics and evangelicals would sort of learn to come together, because James and I were convinced that part of the reason we've lost so many battles, we've lost in many ways the public square, is that we're in isolated silos. We're either working alone or even sometimes at cross purposes, and we thought, look, if we can help create a platform where Catholics and evangelicals are serious about transforming culture can come together, then we could really do something. The book came out. We were having all these meetings in which we had this remarkable kind of diversity of people in rooms together that had probably never otherwise met, and thought, okay, we think we're supposed to do something else. And that's what the sort of origin of the stream was, essentially an outgrowth of this book, Indivisible. So about half the editors are Catholic, half are evangelical. We have a number of contributors that are Jewish. But our principles, rather than being from the platform of the Republican Party or something like that, are these 10 philosophical principles, and people can check them out. Just go to the site at stream.org and look at more and look under our 10 principles. But there's a set of 10 philosophical principles that bring together the themes of what you might think of as social conservatism and economic conservatism. So a statement of the intrinsic dignity of the human person, and the values of economic freedom and free markets, and the ability of markets to allow people to create things as creatures made in the image of God. So it has kind of philosophical base, but it's not simply a conservative site, because theology is explicitly part of the content. So you might in any day see something critiquing Obamacare right alongside a defense of the resurrection of Christ, because we think theology is actually ought to be a part of the public conversation. It shouldn't be something that we just sort of leave at the door. And so that's, if anything, probably what distinguishes the stream from other conservative sites.
Now, you're an assistant professor as well in the School of Business and Economics at Catholic University. I would assume then that your work on the stream.org is not full-time. Are there full-time editors, publishers, or is everybody kind of contributing on a part-time basis to this endeavor?
No, there's actually a number of folks that are full-time, and in fact, I am myself full-time. I'm a research professor at Catholic U, but this is actually a part of my work. I'm, as a research professor, sort of a research, and in many ways I'm kind of the public face of the business school at Catholic University, and so I'm commissioned to do this. So I sort of have two full-time jobs, actually, but we have Rachel Alexander, whom you've had on your show several times, as full-time. John Smirak is about three-quarters time, but he works twice as fast. And so it's a bit of a mix. And then we have a couple of dozen contributors that don't work for us, but they write for us at least weekly.
So is there any objective, kind of a path to maybe expand into other media, video, radio,
Absolutely.
et cetera?
In fact, I had a 2-hour conference call about this today. So we started out, we wanted to get the print part of the operation fully going, and we've finally done that. We're actually about to retire all news aggregation. So the stuff that was before aggregation is going to be original news summaries. So we'll have original news and commentary and news summaries and some syndicated news. And then we're going to be adding audio podcast and video actually here in the new year. So that's exactly part of the plan, and folks will see it here in the next 6 months or so.
Excellent. Well, that's very good news. I mean, we always need good, solid sites, especially from the Christian perspective. You guys are exceptionally reliable. Again, very little that I've seen on there I disagree with. I'm 90% in accord, probably higher than that. So give us a prediction. We just have a minute left on the show. Tell us how you see this 2016 race coming out.
I think it's going to be very tough. I do think that in Iowa, I think at the moment it's a Cruz-Trump thing. I do think Rubio is doing very well. I do think if 4 4 of the 5 of the guys that are polling in the 1 and 2 digits would drop out, that could change things. But what I think is happening right now is that a lot of conservatives, based on subtle little judgments, have their vote divided. And so I think part of that is benefiting Donald Trump. And so I do think actually the field is just too wide. We need to have a few of these guys drop out. Likely
brokered convention?
Gosh, I hope not. But I think if it's more possible now than at any other time because, Donald Trump is the giant, super large black hole in the middle of the galaxy that's just confounding all the regular expectations.
Well, and in fact, if it is brokered, it's going to be somebody other than Trump that comes out of it, likely. And, of course,
that's
the end
exactly
result of
right.
that is a third-party Trump run. Mark my words. I can tell you that's coming if that happens. Stay with us, The Joe Miller Show. We've got more coming up. Peter Schiff next.